I pray for the Iranian people, and I pray for the United States, Israel, and the people of Iran to prevail over this evil regime.
What have you made of that kind of muted, cautious response from so-called progressives?
All those people who are saying, look at Gaza, look at what they're doing to their children, that was all propaganda. They didn't have the slightest interest in the children of Gaza.
In Iran, women are tearing off their hijabs and getting rid of them, whereas in schools in Britain, young girls are taught how to put a hijab on.
We've had the so-called grooming-gangs, which are really gangs, and every institution that could have stopped that looked away. And the reason they give for looking away was it couldn't judge it. Multiculturalism, the multicultural concept, once it's implemented, that's what it looks like in France, in Germany, everywhere.
Even as the world gets more and more turbulent, there's one thing that never seems to change. Online censorship just gets worse and worse. But there is a really simple way to get around it, thanks to our friends at Private Internet Access, or PIA for short. PIA is the VPN I use and trust. In case you don't know, a VPN, or virtual private network, is an app that hides your IP address and safeguards your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel. Whenever you're browsing online on an unprotected device, your device is transmitting a lot of information out into the open, which can be seen by multiple parties before it reaches the website you're trying to visit. Instead of giving away your personal information and location to the world, PIA lets you change your IP address to one of 91 countries. This means you can gain access to websites and services that are only available in those locations. And it's not just that. Did you know that streaming services like Netflix and Prime Video have huge catalogs of content, but you can only access a fraction of it from your own country? Using PIA to change your location opens up a whole new world of streaming. I love it. Paying for Netflix without using PIA is a bit like paying for front row seats at the cinema, but being forced to sit in the hallway. I also use it all the time when I'm traveling to catch up with what's going on at home. Because PIA is available for all platforms, I never need to worry about my safety or my privacy. It works on Windows, Apple Macs, iPhones, Androids, and more. Even better, you only need one subscription to protect yourself across all the devices you own. So sign up now to the world's most transparent VPN provider and take advantage of our special offer. Viewers of my show can get 86% off a subscription to Private Internet Access. So that's just £1.67 a month. And you also get an extra 4 months thrown in completely for free. To take advantage of this incredible deal, just go to piavpn.com/Brendan. That's piavpn.com/Brendan. Signing up is totally risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 customer support. You won't regret it. Sign up now at piavpn.com/Brendan. Hello, welcome back to the Brendan O'Neill Show with me, Brendan O'Neill, and my special guest this week, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Ayaan, welcome to the show.
Brendan, thank you very much for having me on.
It's always great to have you on. A voice of reason in a world gone mad, so it's always a pleasure to get your thoughts on things. And there's a lot to talk about, I feel, that I want to rack your brains about. And I guess it would be remiss of me not to kick off with what I think is the most important event happening in the world right now, which is the revolt in Iran, the uprising there, the response of the regime, and then, of course, the response of people around the world as well. So I did want to get your thoughts on this as someone who has written so extensively about the problem of extreme Islamism and the impact it can have on freedom and on women. So what have you made of the revolt? I assume you've been following it, and have you felt inspired by it, scared by it? What have been your feelings?
So I think just on an analytical level, you have to break it into two pieces. There's the geopolitical piece, and then there is the piece about the Iranian people. I've always on this sided with the Iranian people. I used to be an Islamist, so I know what that regime is about. And on an emotional level, I'm really invested in the Iranian people having an uprising and overthrowing the Islamist regime. And maybe we've seen so many opportunities that were either wasted or that just didn't come about. And I really hope as always, that this is the moment when the Iranian people reclaim their country, install a government that is a republic or a constitutional monarchy, but let them install what they want, but something better than this evil regime that's imposing its evil policies on them, killing and massacring people. They're so brutal. They're so cruel. And it's just the evil of our day, and they need to be removed. But there's a geopolitical side to the story, which I think we had seen earlier in the summer of 2025, when the United States joined with Israel to destroy their nuclear facilities. And those nuclear facilities, they were enriching uranium to get the weapon on their hands and make good on the promise that they wanted to destroy the state of Israel. They consider the state of Israel the little Satan. After that, then they would go after the great Satan. And the great Satan is the United States of America. So it is what, in the great power dynamics on the geopolitical side, what America chooses to do today to finish off this regime. And that would be a great outcome for the Iranian people. So that's just in a nutshell the way I look at this event. When we're analyzing things, everything on your screen and keyboard fits perfectly well into the analytical framework, but that's obviously the reality is a lot messier than that. And so we'll see what will happen in the coming weeks. But again, I pray for the Iranian people, and I pray for the United States, Israel, and the people of Iran to prevail over this evil regime.
One thing about the regime I mean, there are many awful things about the Iranian regime, the Islamic Republic, which you call evil, I think quite rightly there. Um, One thing that has touched on the consciences of people in the West is the Islamic regime's treatment of women. And the last big protest a few years ago was an uprising of young women and young men in response to the death of a woman in custody, a woman from Iranian Kurdistan who was accused of not wearing her veil properly, and she died in custody. Um, what is it? You have direct experience of this, but what is it about women and women's freedom that so terrifies mullahs and Islamist movements, Islamist governments? What in particular is it about women that seems to drive them so crazy?
Just our bodies, I think. Uh, and all this mystification of the female body, of sex and sexuality, of stories that were told over centuries before science became mainstream and before the Enlightenment, that, even in Europe, we had women as witches and women as this and women as that. But there is, in Islamist theology, is this acute terror of women's bodies. You'll be surprised, the amount of time they spend on what part of the body of a woman is allowed to be uncovered and what part is not allowed. And the most fanatical ones, which are the ones who rule over Iran, have come to the conclusion everything has to be covered. And I remember in the 1980s when I used to be a part of those discussions, where the so-called moderate Islamists would say you should bare the hands and the face and the feet beneath the ankles. And then counter theologians came and said, well, sorry, even that's triggering to men. Triggering meaning, man gets sexually out of control, then they will jump these women, and then we're going to have fitna or chaos caused by the revenge that comes from, because these are honor and shame societies. And so you would have, I used to read through this, and they would make legalistic arguments as to why um, the face, for instance, should be covered. It's the eyes, it's the lips, uh, it's the forehead, and then they get this consensus on let's cover the face, and then it was the ankles, and then it was the hands even. Because you see, in countries like Saudi Arabia, they have to wear gloves, and I'm talking about like 35 degrees, 36 degrees centigrade heat, where women walk around covered like walking tents. And all that was then justified in the name of protecting women and protecting society from chaos that could be unleashed. And it were even more, I mean, it became even more extreme where it doesn't matter if the woman is covered from head to toe. It's her sound, like women talking, women laughing, or high heels, the tap tap of the heel, even that was triggering. And then it becomes even more extreme. And some of them, they delve into, but what about her scent? So women are not allowed to wear perfume, or because, yeah, that can, I don't know, drive you guys to collective insanity. Uh, so then the conclusion is that she has to stay at home. And another conclusion is, her libido, that sexual magic that she has, or witchcraft, or whatever they consider it, that has to be limited by marrying her off as early as possible. So ideally, in the Islamist nightmare, a girl has to have her first period in her husband's home. So Khomeini, when he came to power, he changed the age of marriage to 9 years old. That is legal. And so that's institutionalizing pedophilia from our moral perspective looking in. This regime and the Islamist narrative, it is really, truly, purely evil. And these people don't just theoretically believe in it, they've tried to implement it. But what I find really fascinating about Iran and the people of Iran is that the men of Iran stand with their women. So women can actually go out and protest and organize and reject this and subvert it with the help of Iranian men. I think of Iranian men as really brave, um, honorable, for them to stand, for fathers to stand with their daughters, for husbands to stand with their wives, for brothers and cousins and nephews to stand with their female relatives and against the regime, and therefore against the ideology. And when you look at Iranians in the diaspora, the most emancipated, educated, balanced women from the Middle East, you'll find are Iranian women.
And over the past few years, when we've seen footage from Iran of women burning their hijabs and dancing around open fires as they kind of throw off these restrictive garments, you notice that they're often being cheered on by their brothers, their boyfriends, their husbands. There are often men at those protests too, and it's incredibly inspiring.
On that note, when you have, these crazy feminist talk in the West that we have, where we have liberal white women doing all things of, to me, like really baffling stuff, you find that the Iranian women look at that and they say, but that's not feminism. To hate folk is not feminism. And that's not what we're fighting for in Iran. We're not fighting to hate men. We're fighting this ideology that's putting us in a
Yeah.
bad place. And so I think feminists in the West, in this crazy world we live in, this upside down world we live in, women, feminists from the West, should really be learning from the wisdom of the Iranian women. You cannot emancipate yourself from an evil regime or an evil ideology without the help and protection of men.
Spiked is thrilled to be partnering with a free speech union for one of their upcoming events. In Defense of Trial by Jury will be a live panel discussion on Thursday, the 29th of January in London. The right to be tried by a jury of your peers was enshrined in Magna Carta, yet it could soon be torn up by this Labour government. This is a threat not only to justice, but also to free speech. Defendants charged with so-called speech crimes are almost twice as likely to be found not guilty when tried by a jury than when judged by a magistrate. Speakers at the event will include Toby Young, General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, criminal barrister Adam King, Kate O'Reilly, who helped to get justice for the wronged postmasters in the post office scandal, and Paul Boateng, a Labour peer and Britain's first black cabinet minister who served as Chief Secretary to the Treasury under Tony Blair. Tickets are now on general sale, and you can find the link in the show notes. Plus, discounts are available for Spike supporters and members of the Free Speech Union. If you're a Spike supporter, the promo code has already been sent to you in an email. If you haven't received it, please contact us at supporters@spiked-online.com. If you're not yet a Spike supporter, then sign up now to claim your discount on this event and get unlimited access to Spiked. You can do that by going to spiked-online.com/support. Speaking of people in the West, feminists and others, I wanted to ask you about the response of progressives in the West to what's been happening in Iran. Quite a lot of people have commented on the fact that, hundreds of thousands of these people have been hitting the streets every weekend for 2.5 years with their kafirs on to complain about Israel and the so-called genocide in Gaza, etc. And they all seem to have gone quiet over the past 2 weeks and don't seem to care very much about justice in the Middle East anymore. They're certainly not talking about Iran. I was on a march for a free Iran in London this weekend, and it was really well attended, but I couldn't help but noticing that, 95% of the people were Iranian people. And
Yeah.
London's got a large Iranian population, and it makes sense they would be on the streets fighting for a free country. But, I was thinking, where are the other Brits? Where are people like me? Shouldn't we be offering more solidarity? And there was just no one really. So, what have you made of that kind of muted, cautious response that we're seeing from so-called progressives over here?
I think the left is being exposed today for what it is. That labels like progressive and justice and liberal and social justice, these are labels that they use to advance another evil agenda, another evil ideology, which is really a resurgence of communism. And I think most Westerners thought that they had defeated communism in 1989. Except that didn't happen. It's just like a hydra. It's come up again with different heads, now working hand in glove with the Islamists. Um, and an emancipated Iran, a truly liberated Iran, is not in the interest of these people who call themselves progressives. Because what do the Iranian people want? When I listen to them and talk to them, they want a functioning economy that's based on growth, a market economy, and therefore capitalist. They'd like to work with Israel and with America and with other Western countries. They're fighting for individual rights. They're fighting for the rights of women. They're fighting for all the things that progressives purport to fight for, but actually want to destroy. For family, for schools that function and transmit knowledge and wisdom. There are hundreds of thousands of Iranians who are converting to Christianity. So progressives, the lefty, people on the left today with that neo-communist agenda, identity-based, they hate all of that. So they're not going to stand with the people of Iran. They're not going to stand with those who are liberated in Venezuela from the grip of Maduro. And that exposes them. That tells you that from October 7, 2023 until now, all those people who are trying to, like milk the emotions of the Brits and the French and the Americans and saying, look at Gaza, look at what they're doing to their children. That was all propaganda. It was all posturing. It was all propaganda directed towards the destruction of Israel. They didn't have the slightest interest in the children of Gaza. And to them, these ideologies, Islamism and communism, the human being is worthless. The means justify the ends. And if killing a lot of people like the Iranian regime is doing and looking away from that, that in some way advances the end, then they're fine with it. The CCP in China and all the things that China does, these liberal progressives, they never say anything about it. There's a huge Muslim community of about 10 million people that China is currently oppressing. They have them in internments. They're culturally genociding them. Women are being raped and sterilized. They're being re-educated into, and completely, the entire culture is being erased. Where are the progressives? Where are the marches for these people on the streets? Because the CCP, the Communist Party of China, that agenda is consistent with the agenda of groups like Momentum and Corbyn in the UK, but in large swaths of the Democratic Party in the US are now claimed by what we call the Democratic Socialists of America. Zoran Mamdani, the woman who became the mayor of Seattle. I don't know. All the center left parties in Western countries seem to have fallen into these wrong so-called progressive hands. And so, yeah, that's a problem we're facing in the West. Our own people, our own political parties, and our own institutions being used against us.
I wonder what you think about the contribution of moral relativism to all of this? Because earlier on you said something really interesting, which is that if we look at Iran's legalization of marriage, to a very young age, through our moral perspective, it looks like institutionalized pedophilia. I think you're absolutely right on that. But some people don't like to look with a moral perspective on foreign cultures, and certainly on the Islamic religion, because that would be seen as morally judgmental. Who are we to judge? We have no right, and so on. Do you think there's an and I was thinking that, in Iran, women are tearing off their hijabs and getting rid of them, whereas in schools in Britain, young girls are taught how to put a hijab on as a way of encouraging, on
Yeah.
World Hijab Day every day, to encourage them to feel more respect for Islamic garments, Islamic cultures. Is there an element where it's impossible for some people to feel even remotely enthusiastic about the uprising in Iran, because they have been brainwashed to a certain extent by this ideology that says criticizing Islam is Islamophobic?
Yeah, I think in Europe, the neo-communists, those, who are using identity as a foundational pillar for advancing the communist agenda, in Europe, they've really made good use of that concept called multiculturalism, which again, like all the tools, the language tools that the communists use in the early days, it sounds so attractive and it sounds so inclusive and compassionate, respect my culture and I'll respect your culture. And that then started to promote in the 80s, 90s, but some people will say it goes as far back as the 1960s, but immigration really started to come up in 80s, 90s, 2000s as the numbers grew. This multiculturalism concept was taken from academia and academic philosophical discussions and actually implemented as policy. And what does that then look like when you implement it as policy? That means you're going to teach this stuff in school. You know, you share my holiday and I share your holiday, and it's my attire and it's your attire. It all seems so innocent and again, they like using the word inclusive. And that takes us to moral relativism because multiculturalism, by definition, insists on moral relativism. It says all morals are relative. When I talk to people and I oppose female genital mutilation, I'm quickly confronted by white women who are saying, "Who are we to tell these people that they should not practice a tradition they had for thousands of years?" Well, the tradition is practiced in your country, and your country purports to protect children. And so you have to make a moral choice. And now, very quickly, we're talking about moral absolutes. And it is whose morality prevails. Is it the one in your constitution, or is this thousand-year-old tradition? And you see, as you said, brainwashed, a lot of people who were raised in this ecosystem of schools and media and art and just information and knowledge system that tells them do not judge the other, especially if the other is from somewhere else and if the other has a skin tone even slightly darker than yours. You're not allowed to judge it. And so we find ourselves now in this incredibly moral mess. It's a mindless morality. It's not relative anymore because in your country, in the United Kingdom, the NHS is seriously promoting cousin marriage. Okay, we've had the so-called grooming gangs, which are really rape gangs, and every institution that could have stopped that looked away, and the reason they give for looking away was they couldn't judge it. They were, this multiculturalism, the multicultural concept, once it's implemented, that's what it looks like. You go to Minnesota today, in the United States, and billions of taxpayer dollars are missing. Again, it's multiculturalism. You see, we call it stealing, but they call it something else. And anyway, there's this second, then other layer, hidden layer into the multiculturalist, moral relativist. This concept is that these ethnic communities, they vote, if you give them what they want, they vote as a bloc for benefits, for exemptions from the Constitution and from the law, and for all sorts of exceptions. And so this is what we have. This is multiculturalism in action. That's Minnesota, that's cousin marriage, that's grooming gangs, That's crime writ large. That's women who can't walk the streets. That is people openly protesting and demonstrating, 100,000 people strong, weekend after weekend, in support of Hamas. That will have nothing to say for the people of Iran or the people of Venezuela. All of that is multiculturalism in action.
I did want to ask you a little bit about the UK. I know you keep your eye on lots of things happening around the world, but in Britain, sometimes I feel like we're making progress on the problem of radical Islam, Islamism, and so on. And then other times I think we're not. And the recent example, I'm sure you've heard about the scandal of West Midlands police who banned Maccabi Tel Aviv fans from attending a game last year. It's now become very clear that they were openly capitulating to Islamist elements in Birmingham. They were asking radical mosques for their thoughts on whether these Jewish fans should be allowed to come to Britain. They knew that armed Islamists were planning on attacking the Maccabi fans, and they suppressed that information and banned the Jews instead of protecting the Jews. I mean, just the most extraordinary scandal. And I wonder if you've been following that, or more broadly, what you think about what's happening in the UK in relation to the influence of Islamism on government infrastructure, even on police forces. Is that something that concerns you?
It does concern me, and I've been telling the British government, or the various British governments that ever bothered to ask me, that Islamization coming through multiculturalism, holding hands with the so-called progressives, that we are going to find ourselves in a state where, and we were saying this, people like me were saying, voices like mine were saying this 20 years ago, we're going to find Islamization in practice will mean the mainstreaming and legitimization of anti-Semitism. You're going to make hating Jews again cool. And we would say it will bring back misogyny, hatred of women and not protecting them from harassment and so on. And in and we just used to be poo-pooed as, oh, you're hysterical, get a grip. And now that's exactly what you are describing, where I'm not saying individual members of the police are anti-Semitic, but the decision they made is an Islamized decision. And that Islamized decision is we don't want Jews here. And they have the British police force helping them in that outcome. Look at the outcome. Now you can poo-poo me and I can say, I told you so, but that doesn't make me happy. It just makes me so sad. I feel so horrible and depressed because I think if we had tackled these problems 20 years ago, 25 years ago, actually taking these things seriously, because all of it was predictable, when these problems, in proportion to what we are seeing today, they were relatively small, and they could tell, we had smaller numbers that could easily be assimilated or deported. But now we have this big mess. And so we have our institutions now, through this process of Islamization and through this process of multiculturalism, not only legitimizing, not only mainstreaming, but enforcing it as a policy, Jew hatred as a policy in the United Kingdom, in France, in Germany, everywhere. And the people in power throwing their hands up in the air and saying, what do you want me to do? Deport citizens? So then they even though they're in power and they've used that power wittingly or unwittingly for this outcome, now when they're held responsible, they throw their hands up in the air and say, but I'm really powerless against the problem.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. It's terrifying when you put it like that. You mentioned already the so-called grooming gangs, as you say, they're actually rape gangs, and it's come back to political life in Britain. That's largely down to Elon Musk, in fact, and to X, and the fact that people could speak about it more openly than they could in the past. It looks like we're going to have a national inquiry, but even still, it feels like we're not being honest enough about the scale of this scandal and how many layers of officialdom is implicated in it. And I just wonder what kind of cut through the rape gang scandal has had in the US, in the kind of circles that you move in. Is it something that people talk about? And what's your perspective on how this was able to go on for so long?
I agree with you that we cannot thank Elon Musk enough for him to take time away from his core businesses, and not just his core businesses, but his passion. I think the guy wants to go to Mars, and this is all a distraction for him in so many financially, politically, his time. And he's doing the right thing, has done the right thing, and decided, he was going to speak for the voiceless and the weakest. And so that's something I truly appreciate and praise, and I'll forever be grateful for it. And I think those girls will be forever grateful, and the families of the victims. What is my perspective on it? My perspective is, because of Twitter, that's now become X because of Elon Musk, we've achieved near universal information. This thing is happening. You can't hide from it. This is what happened to little girls in Britain. And this is the scale and the scope of this evil rape gun. We also know that's, by the way, not just happening in Britain or happened in Britain, but it's happening all over Western Europe. And that there were political leaders, there were social leaders, there were cultural leaders, there were educational leaders, there were law enforcement people who knew about all of this for a very, very long time and who looked the other way. So these inquiries, I think there's an inquiry underway in the United Kingdom that they've asked me to come and testify, that is going to go around the government, because the sitting government in the United Kingdom is frustrating the inquiry that the British citizens want, but this group is going around them. I see that as progress, because it means we're going to get to the bottom of this with or without the help of the government. I think that's a very healthy development in the UK and in other countries if they want that and if they can achieve it. What are we going to find? What is it going to reveal? It's going to reveal that there are these three forces that are working together. There is the ethnic, tribal, Pakistani, and it's not just Pakistanis, by the way. There are different ethnic groups. The Pakistani one was so large that they got all the attention, but I mean, there were Iraqis, Afghans, Somalis, so various ethnic groups that operate with this clan mentality and this bloodline mentality, where they have a modesty doctrine. This is the position of women, and women who are considered to be loose and unprotected by men. Therefore, they're taken and they treat them as prey, and they prey on them. That's exactly what these so-called grooming gangs were about. These are predators preying on helpless children. And that force was then confronted with, again, I go back to the multiculturalist society that is saying, to even report on it, what's going on, is to think twice. I think, is that a racist thing? Maybe am I being ethnocentric? Oh, what is the readership going to do? And so it creates this self-doubt. There were people who looked away because they thought if they did something about it, their careers would be at stake. There are people who looked away because they thought, if I say something about it, I'll not be re-elected. There were people maybe who were in on it, profiting from it. And an inquiry will reveal all of these various interests and how these interests coincided and why something as big as this could happen for so many years and is still happening, and everyone looked away. It's going to say something about your society, right? You have a class society where people who think of themselves as upper classes look at the victims and look at them as white trash. That kind of reckoning is going to have to take place. And so an inquiry is a healthy thing. It's a good thing. And I'm glad it's coming about. And the third one is, of course, it's the Islamization. This could happen only in an Islamized concept. And when, I wrote that book, Pray, in it was public. I was doing the research for it in 2017, 18, 19, but it was published in 2020. I was smack in the middle of the pandemic. And borders were closed then. So if you talked about immigration, people would say, well, there's no immigration happening. The borders are closed.
Yeah.
Which tells you, again, borders can be closed if they were to close them. But
Yeah.
here we go. When I asked political leaders, have you talked to imams? Have you been to the mosques? I would be confronted with, well, the imams say it's your society that's enabling this thing. We can't blame the perpetrators, because this takes us back again to why, when you asked me the question, why does the Islamist regime hate women? It's if you allow women to go outside and create this fitna, uh, and mingle with men, and alcoholic drinks are served, then what do you expect? Like, it's your fault. So society, these neighborhoods were Islamizing. Multiculturalism is the pillar on which policies were based on in the relationship between minorities and host society, and these ethnic communities were hiding, uh, and either partaking in it or hiding, protecting the perpetrators from prosecution.
Yeah, that's right. That is exactly what happened. You mentioned feminists already, Western feminists. You've mentioned them a couple of times. They've got a lot to answer for, in my view. I just wanted to ask you what kind of calculation a Western feminist is making when she decides that, you know, protecting multiculturalism is more important than protecting a 12-year-old girl in Rotherham from being raped. You know, what kind of calculation is being made there? And, you know, if you think back to the Me Too era, when lots of genuine bad behavior was exposed in Hollywood and other parts of the entertainment industry, and that was on the front pages all the time, and Western feminists were all saying Me Too on the internet, and it was taken incredibly seriously. But then when you have something like the rape gang scandal, the same feminists look the other way, they feel uncomfortable, they don't want to talk about it. What's going through their minds when they make those kinds of calls?
What's not going through their minds is the victims, the girls. That's what's not going through their minds. Victims of grooming gangs, victims of female genital mutilation, that's not going through their minds. The victims of the Iranian regime, that's not going through their minds. What's going through their minds? I should say, when I first came to the Netherlands in 1992, and I witnessed just how emancipated women were, how powerful and equal and free. Oh my gosh, I was so impressed. And every person I spoke to, how did this come about, told me it's because of feminism. And so I fell in love with feminism. I thought that's a good thing. Feminism is a great thing. Now, not all things um, are what they appear to be. I started to look back into what we call feminism in the modern era, which is really very different from those early narratives that were seeking an emancipation of women. In the 18th century, um, um, philosophers who were saying maybe it's time to send girls to school, open higher education up for them, maybe give them the right to vote, maybe treat them equally before the law, maybe give them this, that, and the other, maybe not condemn female sexuality, maybe not call them witches and burn them at the stake. I thought that was feminism, because that was the sort of thing that was happening where I came from. But now when I look at what you and I are calling feminism today, it's just a branch of this neo-communist, identity-based agenda. And women are being used to advance that agenda. We are sacrificial lambs. The feminists who are, I don't know, putting pussy hats on and protesting Donald Trump's inauguration, they're not putting pussy hats on and fighting against any of the things that actually mean anything to us, which is our physical safety as women. Then, for many, many centuries, again, that vast cohorts of women's emancipation people, they fought for women only spaces where, as a woman, you could feel safe and you didn't want to be, ogled by men, or in any way, shape, or form meant to feel you got your privacy with a fellow. It's places as intimate as toilets, locker rooms, uh, a hospital ward. That's now being all opened up for men pretending to be women. And the feminists are not saying anything. If anything, they're on the other side. And so that mm, had me do a double take and say, what is this feminism all about? And they also demonize, roles that are naturally. You have your natural role as a man, and I have my natural role as a woman. And the source of joy for women is marriage and it's children. And the so-called feminists over years and years, they've just really demonized, they've cheapened those things. And lots of women who grew up with those narratives, they're now turning their backs on marriage, on motherhood, um, on being a wife, on things that many of us find fulfilling. So I don't like the Western feminists. And again, I go back to saying maybe there's a thing or two they can learn from the Iranian women who are strong women, who are real women. And the fact that we want a real relationship, a complementary relationship with our fellow men. We don't want to demonize them.
Yeah, I mean, if feminist means fighting for the right of men to go into women's changing rooms and undress in front of women and girls, then it's obviously not a pro-woman movement anymore. I think that's pretty clear.
Can I please compliment people like J.K. Rowling, Helen Joyce, Julie Bindel, loads of women in the UK, Megyn Kelly in uh, across the pond has done quite. Kristen Wagner of the I think it is the Alliance Defending Freedom. There are lots of women who I don't know if they carry the label feminist or not, and I don't care because these labels, obviously, language has just been corrupted. But I'm really thankful for these women because they're standing up for what is right, and they're standing up for the rights of women because they know that these rights were painfully fought for. That there are so many people who died for it, men and women, and so I just want to applaud those people. But I want to say the label feminism is not something that I cherish anymore.
I just want to ask you a couple of questions about the US. You mentioned Minnesota already and the Somali fraud scandal, which has had huge cut through here in the UK. People, ordinary people are talking about it. It really has become quite a noted scandal. Um, just wanted to get your sense of, again, how something like that could happen. I mean, I guess it's probably similar to the rape gang scandal here, where various layers of society in Minnesota were willing to turn a blind eye to it. But it does seem extraordinary that members of the community could, pilfer so much money from the American people, that hard-earned taxes of their fellow Americans, supposedly. Um, what have you made of that? And is it really angering Americans that something like this could happen in Minnesota in the 21st century?
Yes, it's angering the silent majority, a majority that was for decades made silent. They were pacified because they were told that they were white and they were privileged and that they held slaves, they colonized, and that it was time for them to make room for people of color and women and gay people, and society was divided into these identity segments. And so that is why, again, I compared the grooming gang scandal. How could it happen at this scale? How could so many people look away? And it's the same with Minnesota. I mean, the numbers involved are so staggering that you think everybody in Minnesota must have known, and every Somali on the planet must have known because it's so much money. And how could that happen? How could that be hidden for so long? And that is because of these three forces working together. So the Somali ethnicity, the clan code, either you're in on it, you're profiting from it, and obviously you don't want to stop it, or you don't like it, and you might want to say, "Hey, that might put us in danger." But if you speak up, you lose your head, not just yours, your whole family. So the way the clan code works is not they don't go after individuals; they go after groups. And things are always so volatile within Somali dynamics that many people, just for the sake of peace, just choose to zip up. So there's the profiting or fear. That if I say something, it, I can't. And then maybe there was some quiet whistleblowing that was going on, which I hear again. I have no contact with Somalis. I hear though that whistleblowers, anybody who wanted to reveal this, was quickly shut down. And that brings me to the second uh, dynamics of the clan code, and then there is multiculturalism at work. Because if these things are revealed just by the civil servants or by people who are seeing this, the multiculturalists say, but that is going to incriminate Somalis and it's going to make them look bad. And therefore, we just have to shut up and look away, look the other way. And then number three is the opportunistic side of it. It is the Democratic Party in Minnesota absolutely relying on that ethnic vote of the Somalis. You cannot win Minnesota without winning Minneapolis, and there are 80 to 120,000 Somalis. And if they can be mobilized to vote, you have a uniparty there. And so these dynamics working together. And so part of it is you can't blame only the Somalis and their clan culture. You should blame them. We should not have a clan. We can't have parallel societies. Either you assimilate or you go away. But what on earth are we going to do about the Democratic Party, the center-left, the main center-left party in the United States? It's like, what are you going to do about the main center-left party in the UK? What are we going to do about center-left parties in the West? Because they've decided that that is their business model. That's their electoral business model, to bring in these networks of ethnic groups, give them citizenship, get them to vote, then game the system, split it, and then you have a different system. So the silent majority has to come up against this and fight it. And I think in the 2024 election, in November 2024, in America, that was the first, I think, maybe first 2016, then 2024. And I don't know, I hope the more people that wake up, the more that this Democratic Party can be held accountable.
Yeah, one thing that really struck me in the Somali scandal was I read about this in the New York Post, where when the officials started finally to investigate some of these fake charities, one of the fake food charities there said, listen, if you keep pressing, we're going to accuse you of racism. And basically saying to them, look, we're going to embarrass you in front of the world and say you're racist, you're anti-Somali. And it seems to have worked. They seem to have backed off for a period of time and stopped their investigations.
It backfired back then. But now, again, I want to compare the US to the UK. So the inquiry on the Keir Starmer's government was frustrated, and we don't know if it's going to happen or not and to what extent, if it ever happens. But the Republican Congress has sent out subpoenas to the governor of Minnesota, to the attorney general, to the mayor probably. All of these people, they cannot escape, because I think in America right now, we have, hopefully, fingers crossed, a government that is not going to let this pass.
It's interesting what you say about the silent majority. And I think there are so many silent majorities in countries of the Western world who are just dying to speak up. And increasingly, they are speaking up. And I wondered if, those accusations of racism or Islamophobia, in the UK, we even have a word now, hijabophobia, which is people who are critical of the hijab. Do those kinds of slurs work anymore? I mean, they really did work for a period of time in the woke years, when, think about the BLM hysteria in 2020, and even prior to that, where people were shut down all the time by being called racist or bigoted or phobic or privileged. Do you think that's wearing off now and it just doesn't land in the way that it used to, and it's not going to prevent people from saying what needs to be said?
It's not just wearing off. I think it's for the so-called progressives, it's become counterproductive. And for a while, I actually thought the Democratic Party in the United States was just going to say, let's talk about bread and butter issues. Let's just not talk about identity anymore. I think that conversation is still ongoing within the Democratic Party in the United States. Unfortunately, I think those who are invested in identity politics within the party, they have the loudest voices, and they're so zealous. They have a great deal of conviction. That's how they do things. So it's a waiting game to see if the moderate left is going to stand up to that, what used to be a fringe and now threatens to be mainstream, right? With the average American, the average European, the average Brit, the silent majority has found its voice. And I think that's again because of Elon Musk and X and other there's like a ballooning of podcasts. Really, anyone can start a podcast and can have these conversations. You don't have to have it through the BBC and through the Times and Telegraph. You can have these conversations wherever you want. They're trying to close pubs, I heard, in the UK, so people can't talk about this stuff. But you can talk about it because we live in the day and age of the internet. And so the fights we're going to see today are not going to be you are a racist. And people don't even bother to, you're not a racist, shut up. Um, but the fights we're going to have, the political power fights we're going to have, is about censorship. It's trying to censor the internet. That's where I think the fight has shifted away from, because this name calling is not effective anymore. It's counterproductive. So now they're going heavy handed. They're going to try and censor the internet. So we're going closer and closer. We're getting closer and closer to China.
Yeah, I think the battle for freedom on the internet is going to be one of the big battles of the next few years. No question about that. Okay, my last question for you is just on how optimistic you feel about the future. If you're looking at politics in the US and politics in Europe, there's lots of interesting things happening. Lots of people are speaking out in a way that they previously couldn't. When I look at the US now, I sometimes think to myself, it's kind of the divide is kind of like Trump on one side and Mamdani on the other. So you've got the kind of Trump as the populist weapon of ordinary people who want to, shunt aside the corrupt old establishment. Then you have the rise of Mamdani and the other democratic socialists of America that you mentioned, and the question of what the Democrats will become. Will they become the crazy woke party, or will they go back to speaking to working class Americans? And it seems to me that's kind of the divide, and that's the fork in the road. And I wonder how positive you feel that the West will go in the right direction, the kind of direction we have been going in for some time.
I'm very optimistic about America. And I think, you've got to hear 2 years in my sort of the work I do, 2 years is a very short time. So a lot can happen in 2 years. But right now, you framed it as Trump versus Mamdani. And I don't think it's Trump versus Mamdani. I think it's going to be J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is now the vice president. He's going to run for president. He grew up in a very poor, challenged neighborhood in Ohio. He's a Christian. He is a family man. He is married to a woman whose parents came from India. And so he has, I would say, all of the features of what makes America and the American dream. You can be born, I don't know, in a slop, and then you can become the vice president of the United States of America. He crushes the whole identity politics nonsense because he's married to a woman from somewhere else. And I think he's also going to appeal to the foundational principles, values of Christianity and Christian principles. So there's J.D. Vance, and then there's Mamdani, who's a globalist, a Marxist, a Maoist, an Islamist, and all the isms he represents. Everything that Mamdani represents is chaos, it's brutality, it's lying, it's cheating to giving things, it's economic disaster. And so if we can frame it like that, Vance versus Mamdani, I think the silent majority is going to go with Vance. And I'm not saying, Vance has got to overcome all sorts of hurdles, like what we call the mainstream media is still in the hands of people who are excusing or openly cheering for Mamdani. So our universities, by the way, Mamdani got, I don't know, his ideas from the American education system. So the American education system is compromised. We have lots and lots of problems within our institutions. But I can make the case, I can campaign for Vance, like J.D. Vance versus Mamdani. Are you kidding me?
Ayaan, thank you very much. Thanks again to PIA VPN for sponsoring this episode. Take control of your digital life and get PIA for 86% off. Click the link in the description below or scan the QR code.